G'day, athlete. Welcome to the Kilted Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Keith, the Kilt Man, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about isometric. Before we go into the dictionary definitions of isometric, I want you to imagine you're at a pub with some mate. You've just ordered beers, and you set yourself the challenge. Whoever can hold their beer out with their arms straight parallel to the ground, whoever can hold that beer for the longest wins the challenge and getting the beer for free. So you're holding that beer out. After a minute, your arms are getting sore. After a minute and a half, it's sore. You're holding your hands up, shaking. The beer starts feeling a bit at the top because your hand's shaking, but you're determined to win the challenge because you want your next beer for free. What you're doing there is an isometric exercise. Now, probably not the best example for an isometric exercise, but essentially that's what it is. You're trying to hold that beer out in the one position. And even though that beer is only quite light, because you're holding it one position, that light weight becomes very heavy after a while, and your muscles are working hard just to hold that position. That's essentially what an isometric exercise is. So now that I've explained it kind of in my terms, let's go to the definition now. So an isometric exercise is a static muscle contraction without any visible movement to the joint. So if you imagine a traditional weightlifting exercise, it comprises of two movements, the lifting of the weight and the lowering of the weight. So the lifting is called the concentric, the lowering is called the eccentric. Now, this involves at least one joint. So there's at least one joint in your body moving with each movement. So I've talked in previous episodes about isolation versus compound exercises. An isolation exercise where one joint is moving, for example, a bicep curl, and a compound movement such as a squat, you've got two or more joint moving. You've got your knees and your ankles moving. So in any traditional weightlifting exercise involves at least one and often more joint being moved. With isometric, however, there's no joint being moved or no visible movement of any joint. So you're just holding a position and you're generating force against gravity or an immovable object. A few examples of this are a plank or a prone hold, a wall squat, a dead hang, or even just like holding an object you can no longer hold it. So during this episode, I want to talk about some of the advantages to isometric and how you can incorporate them in your exercise routine, as well as some various isometric exercises that you could incorporate into your routine. So what are some of the key advantages of adding isometric or even doing a standalone isometric workout? One of the key advantages is you don't need much equipment, and sometimes even no equipment at all. So if you're, say for example, away from your usual gym, you're on holidays, you might be at home for a while and can't get out your gym, whatever reason, isometrics can do or you can do a whole isometric workout with no equipment. Or if you've got very limited equipment at home, you can incorporate them into your workout. You do these workouts everywhere, or almost everywhere, because, one of the things that we do need for an isometric workout is gravity. So I guess if you're on a space station where there's no gravity, it's probably not ideal. But pretty much anywhere on Earth, on the surface, maybe not underwater, but on the Earth land surface, you can do an isometric workout. These are good if you're injured or recovering from an injury, and you're trying to build strength back up without wanting to go heavy. Also, if you're at the point where going heavier is not like practical. For example, I've spoken in previous podcasts about challenging yourself at each workout. Getting progressive overload, and probably the most well-known way of doing that is to add more weight, but sometimes it's just not practical to add more weight, whether it's because you don't have the extra weights available, or it might be because it's too dangerous to add more weight, or maybe adding more weight kind of like makes your joints hurt or something like that. Doing the isometric in that workout, is another way of making that workout more difficult. Another advantage is if you have a weakness in a point in the range of motion in an exercise, you can work on that for isometric. For example, a squat. A lot of people that are coached do a squat when they first start out at the bottom end of the squat, at the lower end there. Then these kind of wobble and cave in and stuff. So holding that position isometrically is a good way to build strength in that weaker part of the range of motion. Lightness is actually also relatively safe as opposed to in big weights, and it's relatively simple. As long as the technique's right, it's quite simple. Isometric are also low impact, so instead of you doing an exercise that involves a impact in potentially injuring your joint, isometric are low impact and they're good for if you are injured or if you are a beginner. And isometric are good for like all ranges, whether you're a beginner, whether you're super experienced. Isometric has a place in every workout. So for a beginner, I often coach a beginner to hold a position just to build on that strength, especially in things like the squat, as I previously mentioned. Often someone first starting out doing a squat will be quite weak at the bottom end of the range of motion, and these will start moving around and caving in. So often I'll coach those people to hold that bottom position for a few seconds before standing up again. And yeah, so it's good for beginners, but it's also great for experienced lifters as well. So yeah, especially if you kind of read that plateau thing where it's kind of difficult to, while you find yourself not regressing and you can't conceivably add more weight. So yeah, that's a good way. So it's not just for beginners. There's advantages for seasoned experience. Lifters that add isometric into the program, there's definitely benefit. And I'll give an example later on in this episode about an isometric workout that I did only yesterday. Now I'm going to talk about two basic types of isometric exercises. A lot of coaches will break them up further types and based on duration of hold and things like that. I'm going to keep this a little bit simple. I'm going to break them up into like the gravity, the holds that require gravity, and the pushing against an immovable object. So the first type is probably the type that most people are more familiar with when we talk about isometric exercises, and they're the ones where we're generating force against gravity to either hold our body weight up or to hold another weight up. So examples of that would be a plank or a prone hold. Some people them holding the bottom end of a squat or a wall sit or some kind of lunge where you're just holding that position, or even just holding a weight. Say for example the up position of a bench press. And as I said, the only essential ingredient is gravity. So anywhere where there's gravity, you can do these exercises. There may be some basic equipment that you need. For example, if you're doing a dead hang, which is like you're just hanging in the down position of the chin up, or even the holding the up position of the chin up. You're obviously going to need a bar to do that, but essentially you don't need much equipment at all. If you're doing a wall sit, you'll obviously need a wall, and if you're holding a weight statically, obviously need some sort of weight to hold. And in these exercises, you're essentially holding that position for, it could be 20 seconds, could be 45 seconds, a minute, however long. It might be for as long as you can, depending on your goal in your workout. It could be for a couple of seconds. But I'll talk about duration later, but essentially you're holding that position and resisting against gravity. Gravity that trying to pull you down. So for example, in a plank, you're holding that position and gravity trying to pull you down and you're generating force in your core, in your glute to resist that so you don't fall on the floor in the down position of the squat. You're holding your upper leg parallel to the ground and you're holding that and even though you're not moving, your quads start to burn because you're resisting against gravity. So even though no joint movement in these exercises, you're actually your muscles working hard to generate force against gravity. If you were to just hold a weight, say for example, a kettlebell in one arm, and just hold it there for as long as you could with your arm straight beside your body. Your forearms going to start burning, and your shoulders going to start burning because that weight, gravity's going to want to pull that weight down toward the ground, and your core, your forearm, shoulder is working against gravity there. And the second type is applying force against an immovable object, so a wall or a bar or a hole. It's not going to move, but you're still trying to buy force against that. So imagine like if you put your arms out against the wall and you know you're not going to push that wall over, but imagine you just try and push the wall over. You're generating force in shoulders, maybe in your leg, using a leg push as well. So even though that you know you're never going to push that wall over, you're using that create force, which is making your muscle work. So you hear stories about people that have been like in a jail, or I have the stories about prisoners of war during the Second World War that have become like really strong just by pushing against bars in their cell. On a side note, one of my least favorite exercises, because really a non-exercise, is the wall push-up, where people kind of do these token push-ups against a wall, and they don't achieve anything unless you're like very like sedentary and don't do absolutely almost nothing. But apart from that, like a wall push-up don't do anything for you. But I often say like you're actually better off just standing there pushing against the wall. You would get more exercise value out of pushing against the wall and doing one of these token wall push-ups. Anyway, that's just a little side note there, but that's essentially like that type of isometric exercise. Now, some trainers will break them up into other types depending on the how long the hold is for, whether they're holding a short period and stuff. But I like to keep things simple and never do pain. Like the gravity ones where you resist gravity, and you've got the applying force against an immovable object. So you've got the first type you're using gravity to resist, and the second type you're using object, a wall or a bar or something as resistance. Now, I want to talk about some key considerations when you're doing isometrics. So the first thing is technique. So technique, as I've always said, technique is super important. Same with when you're doing isometric, technique is super important, and it's often overlooked because they're trying to do something for a certain period of time, and they do it for a little bit good, and then like their technique suffers. And a good example of that is a plank. People will go into a plank and they might be trying to do it for 2 minutes, and the first 20 seconds might be good technique, and then the technique really suffers. And they might have done the 20 seconds well, and then the last minute 40 was kind of a waste of time because they didn't really do that isometric exercise. They kind of like adjusted it in somehow to make it easier. So if you're looking at a plank, as I've said often, a plank is essentially the up position of a push-up. You can do these on your elbows or on your hands with your arms separate, whichever you like. It is a core exercise. It's also using the glutes. The key to this is there's a great line between the shoulders and the heels. So if your bum's sitting in there, that's because your body's trying to compensate by using the leg instead of core. So use a mirror, use a spot or whatever, make sure your leg is spot on. If you're if you're sagging a little, gravity will drag you down, and your middle section starts sagging because your core is no longer resisting against gravity. That quite often happens, and then people do pretty shocking planks, and then they hey, I planked for like 3 minutes, but it really wasn't very good technique. So technique is technique before time. Okay, so if you can't do these for very long, do them for as long as you can until your technique suffers. Have a rest, do it again, and then your time will come after that. So technique before time. And mind-muscle connection goes hand in hand technique. So focus on, what the muscle that you're trying to use. If the muscle you're trying to use isn't the one that's burning, then chances are you're not doing it correctly. So once again, if you're holding that plank and your core isn't doing the work, then you're not doing it correctly. Then with if you're holding like the bottom position of the squat, if it's not your quads and glutes that are doing the work here, then you need to have a look at your technique, put yourself in the mirror, get something that's right for you. Chances are you're not doing it correctly. Our bodies are always trying to find the path of least resistance. So sometimes subconsciously you're thinking you're doing something correctly, but you're not. So that's where your mirrors, your spotters, or even filming yourself come in hand. So if you have a spotter, your spotter needs to be on the same page as you. Your spotter needs to know what to look for if your technique is correct or incorrect. So to make sure, you're not just pulling anyone off where everyone's saying, hey, can you watch this paint for me, make sure I'm doing it right, because, they may not know whether you're doing it correctly or not. Another consideration is the weight being used if you are using weights, and I'll talk about that a bit later on in the different methods of incorporating isometric. But you need to bear in mind if you can squat 100 kilos in a normal barbell back squat, if you're incorporating isometric into that, you may want to lower the weight because you are making the exercise more difficult, more technical. So don't let the ego guide the weight for you. And another consideration is make sure that all the things that you're using to resist against are, I guess in good condition and dirty, and there's no like slippery surface or anything like that. You don't want to go pushing against a wall that you think is immovable, only find that is movable. You don't want to be doing like playing on like a newly polished floor that's super slippery. Yes, make sure you try surface and wall on thing like that is fake and dirty. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about duration of isometric. It kind of is going to go hand in hand with the next thing after that I'll be talking about, which is ways of adding isometric into workout. So I might kind of chop and change a bit when I'm trying to explain, because the two kind of go hand in hand, because your duration is going to depend on how you're incorporating isometric into your workout. So how long do we be holding these holds for? Well, it depends on your type of workout, the way what you're trying to achieve with your isometric, whether you're doing a standalone isometric workout, whether you're adding isometric into a traditional weightlifting workout, whether you're using it at the end of a weightlifting workout, it's really going to be, it could go in, it could be like 2-3 minutes, could be 2 seconds. As a big thing is your technique is more important than time. So, if you're doing a challenge that you've got to hold a plank for 5 minutes, it needs to be a good plank. Otherwise, if you've only held the plank for 30 seconds, the other 4.5 minutes was just a waste of time. I use the plank example a lot because it's probably the one that I see a lot of people trying to reach for a certain amount of time, but their technique is really pretty crap. But if your whole entire work is just isometric, you might want to, do long hold, might be 3 sets and these are like one rep set, so 3 sets of 1 rep holding position, for a certain amount of time, having a certain amount of rest, could be 2 minutes. I know there's as part of the entry test of the New South Wales police that you need to hold a bank for 9 seconds. So, you might be training something like that. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve here. But generally, if your workout is purely isometric, you'd usually be holding for much longer period. If you're incorporating these into like an end of a traditional weight workout, you might be holding for less time, like you might be holding for 30 seconds instead of a minute. And then if you're incorporating them within the workout, within the traditional workout, so you might be doing a hold at bottom end of each rep, then it could be 2 or 3 seconds you're holding for. So that brings me to the next point, how to incorporate isometric into your workout. So, as I mentioned, you could do just a purely isometric workout, and you kind of work out your whole body just by doing these. You might do like a plank. You might, add some wall squat to your leg. You might, do the bottom end of a Bulgarian split squat. You can create yourself a whole workout just using isometric. Maybe, 3, 4, 5 sets per exercise, and just going, taking each set, which is essentially 1 rep per set, to the maximum until you can no longer hold that position. So, for example, if you're I'll go back to the plank again. If you're feeling that, your bum's starting in the air, your leg taking over, you're, starting to sag in the middle, then you need to end that there. If you're doing a wall sit, if you're finding yourself having to stand up or half stand up or take your shoulders off the wall and lean forward, then that's when you end that there. So it's just like when you're lifting a weight traditionally, when you can no longer lift that weight without sacrificing technique, then you end the set there. The same when you're doing an isometric hold, when you can no longer hold that position, and your technique starts to suffer, that's when you end the set. So as I said, you can build a whole workout around it. And this is great. Like if you're on holidays and don't have access to usual gym, or maybe, you've done a big weight session the day before and you just, you want something less impacted to be better on your joint while your joint recover. Or you might be just like a beginner and not confident. These are good, like complete, body sessions just using isometrics. even incorporating things like holding the bottom end of push-up, where your upper arms are parallel with the ground, holding that position for as long as you can, then pushing yourself. Traditionally, I guess you're still doing a push-up, but you might be holding it up to them with a plank. You might be holding that for as long as you can, and then going into the bottom side and holding that for as long as you can. Things like that, you can build a really solid workout just by doing that. Add things like add a little bit more weight. So with your squat, if you're holding squat, then add a kettlebell or dumbbell and just do a goblet squat and hold that bottom position. You can also add it at the end of a traditional workout, which is what I did yesterday. I'll tell you about my yesterday's workout at the end of the podcast. It's essentially like, for example, if you're doing a big leg workout and you just felt like you needed that little bit extra at the end, you could do some isometric holds, some wall sits after your squat session. Just to like finish off those muscles, just give them like a bit more like work at the end of that session, and that's quite effective. If you've been doing a lot of barbell back squats and then you try to finish off with a wall sit, you're really going to feel that. I know some people do isometrics at the start of the traditional weight session. It's not really something I would do and I would suggest to people, but there's nothing wrong with it, though. It's not like it's a bad thing or anything, but it's going to hamper the amount of weight. If you're looking at lifting, some decent weight, after that, you probably kind of like pre-cook yourself, if you know what I mean. So it's not something that I personally would do. I know some people do it that way, do the isometric before their traditional weightlifting session. Nothing wrong with it. So, there's no harm in giving it a go and see if that works for you. If it works for you, then yeah, go for it. I would finish it after my weight session. Or at the end of my weight session after I did the traditional weight. And the other way you can incorporate it is actually in your set, in your traditional weight set. And the way you'll do that is to like hold maybe 2 seconds at the bottom end or maybe each end of each rep. So for example, if like I explained, if you're doing a push up, you might hold down position parallel with the upper arm parallel with the ground for 2 seconds, push back up, hold down again, hold, like making deliberate lengthy hold. Might be 2 seconds, could be 3, even 5 seconds, depending on what you're actually trying to achieve here. I find this really good for not only breaking the momentum, like ensuring you're using pure strength to push that weight up again instead of like using momentum, but also for working on like strengthening a weak part in that range of motion. As I've said, like the down position of a squat, like holding that leg parallel to the ground in that down position without your knees waving all over the place, holding that position, pushing back up again. I find this is really effective. This is really good to do, like if you're limited how much weight you actually have. So during COVID, when all the gyms were closed down, I was doing my own workouts, but also workouts I was doing one-on-one training with people that were allowed to do it like on an oval or a park somewhere, and I had limited weight that I could use. So I used a lot of isometric hold in these sessions to generate more force and make the exercise more difficult because I just couldn't keep adding more and more weight. So this is good if you're limited on weight. It's also good if you're working on a kind of a weaker part in that range of motion, and it's also good for some reason you just don't want to lift super heavy weight. It might be a danger factor. It might be like a joint factor where if you're lifting too heavy, so the joints might start hurting or something. This is a really good thing where you get a decent workout without constantly adding more and more weight. So you do this with like a seated cable row where you pull the weight back and you're just holding that up position of the weight with your shoulders back, your shoulder blades squeeze together. Hold that for a few seconds before you release. If you're doing a chin up or a pull up, just holding the down position in the dead hang and then just holding the up position as well, just holding that for a couple of seconds is surprising how much more difficult that makes your workout. So imagine if you can if you're doing a barbell back squat, for example, if you chose a way to do 12 reps before fatigue or before technical failure, if you were to use that same weight and hold the bottom end of the squat for 3 seconds, you probably only get about 7 reps out. This is an amazing technique that, yeah, seriously, I would highly recommend. I do this often myself. Also, when you're holding those isometric holds during that lift, make concentrate on your technique. So make sure with that squat, your knees aren't waving all over the place. It's a good chance to concentrate, make sure your technique is nailed. If you're doing a push-up where you're holding at the bottom and at the top, then as a down push-up, make sure your upper arms are parallel with the ground. Make sure you're not sagging towards the ground in the middle. And in the up position, make sure that you have that nice straight line between your shoulders and your heels. Your bum's not kicking in the air, and once again, not sagging in the middle. So just like take those couple of seconds to focus and look and say, hey, is my technique right? Yeah, three type. It's not very tight. Three ways that you can kind of incorporate isometric into workout. You can do that standalone isometric workout. You can do them at the end of your workout or at the beginning if you really want to. Or you can incorporate hold in the middle of your workout. You can also, it kind of falls into the second way. You can also, like, if you're doing like a multiple body parts in the same workout, you kind of like do your relevant holds at the end of that part. Like if you do squat and bench press, you might do your squat holds at the end of your barbell squats before you then move on to the other body part. So yeah, there's a few ways to incorporate them into your workout or do a standalone isometric workout. So as I said, I'm going to finish this episode with talking about my workout yesterday. And it was only a quick leg workout. I had like a bit of time up my sleeve at work. I've kind of got a bit of an advantage where working in a gym, if I have time, a short amount of time, I can go and work on one particular body part. If I don't have time to full body workout, I can do like, that one part of the workout, then come back with the hours later to another part of that workout. That's one of my advantages I have of working in a gym. So I kind of did a quick leg workout. It took less than half an hour, but it was quite a solid workout. I was doing barbell back squats. So I kind of blended the second and the third method of incorporating isometric into your workout here. So I did barbell back squat. So I did significantly less than I would normally squat, but I was holding between at the bottom end between reps. So doing the squat, holding at the bottom for 2 to 3 seconds, and then going into the position of squat. Worked out about 7 and 10 reps per set. Did 6 of that, and then I just finished off with 3 sets of wall sit. So I just held that wall sit, my back flat against the wall with my upper legs parallel to the ground, held them for a minute with a 9 second break. I did that every time. And by the end of that workout, my legs, like those 3 wall sit at the end of that workout were like, they were tough. I could really feel my legs working there. So yeah, it's one of those things like, the ego definitely needs to go out the window when you're doing these things. So obviously I backed off on the weight that I would normally squat. Because if I was trying to hold at the bottom with 100 plus kilos, my technique would not have been good. If I went parallel and I was holding, 100 plus kilos, I may have toppled backwards, I don't know, but probably the safety isn't there for those big weights. So it's best back off the weight a little bit when you do something like that. But yeah, to compensate for that, I guess if I wouldn't be going as in my squat, I would have been going less than parallel. So you definitely need to lift the ego at home when you're doing these kind of workout. And then when it comes to finish off with those wall sit, focus on technique. As soon as that technique starts suffering, then you need to end that set. But yeah, I feel I had a really good workout then, even though this is a fraction of what I normally would do. It was a lot of workout. My leg really worked hard for that workout. So I'll wrap this episode up now, just to do a quick wrap up here. So isometrics, essentially holding a position of no joint movement. You're just holding that position, resisting against gravity or an immovable object. So your muscles are still generating force. There's just no joint movement. They're great for they are actually amazing. They're not good if you're trying to show off your mate or anything like that. It's not the big lift kind of things that are going to impress your mates, but they're really going to do a lot for your technique, for your stamina, for your endurance. And they're great. Just if you're on holidays or something, you can do these things quite easily. Every hotel room has a wall you can be doing wall sit on. It's kind of really that no gym, no problem mentality. You can still do your workout without the gym. So key things to consider, as I said, technique is key here. Technique, without technique, you're just like wasting your time really. And don't let your ego take over. Whether that's going for a particular amount of time, kind of bank of that 3 minutes where, 2.5 minutes of it was really bad technique. Or once again, wait, don't be loading up that 100 plus kilos. And just because that's what you normally squat, if you're trying to hold the bottom, because it's not going to work out too well, because these things make isometric, make that workout more difficult. So you need to factor that in. So anyway, look, I hope you guys got a lot out of that, or something out of that episode. I hope you all had a great Easter too, and enjoyed yourself over the Easter period, and go overboard on the chocolate. I actually didn't have any chocolate at all that weekend, and not through any kind of like amazing discipline and determination, but we actually didn't have any chocolate in the house, so I guess that just, it was just like a bonus. I guess we just didn't think about buying any chocolate, so there were no chocolate in the house over Easter. I did a Tim Tam this morning though, so only one Tim Tam. I've been really quite disciplined on the Tim Tam, just one at a time and not copying the whole packet. If you have heard that episode, motivation versus discipline, check out my last episode, where I talk about motivation versus discipline and eating only one Tim Tam in the packet. I got a couple of other exciting things coming up too. I've got a couple of guests coming on in the next few months. I'm actually working on a different way of recording my podcasts because some of these people are not local to me that are going to be on guests on my podcast. And in fact, they're from other countries. So some exciting things happening. I'm just trying out a new method of recording my podcast so we can facilitate that distance recording thing. So yeah, so stay tuned. There's a couple of exciting things coming up in the next few months. Once again, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Hit that subscribe button. If you think any of your friends could benefit from anything out of this podcast, feel free to share it with them. Put in comments in the comment box. Email me, kiltmanfitness@gmail.com, or find me on Facebook or Instagram at Kilted Athlete Podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you next time. Bye.